Man and mole have battled for the supremacy of the soil for centuries, and it is a conflict that will continue for many more to come, as each seeks the sustenance it provides. During this period, many claims, methods and solutions to removing the moles have been advised and tried. One means that stood the test of time and remains today as it has since it was devised thousands of years ago, and that is to restrain the mole in some form. And I choose my words carefully, as still today in our modern world, things have changed very little since those that came before us set out on this quest to rid the soil of the mole. I will explain this unique and fascinating world through the eyes of the mole catchers, past and present, from the knowledge gained from a daily contact with this world, and one that has enabled us to perceive the harsh environment that is the kingdom of the mole. Of the influences that oppose upon this secret life of a creature rarely seen, never heard, but so often spoken about. We will learn of the changes to the lives of those that sought the moles in the times before us, and how methods then have changed very little now. Of the conflicts and progress above ground that cause suffering below. In addition, I will present how I catch moles today, and the reasons for a compassionate attitude and practice for mole catching in the 21st century. During Tudor times, a strange character appeared in the British countryside. It was following the introduction of two Vermin Acts, one in 1532 and another in 1566, which opened a door for persecution of all living creatures, under the heading of, "It's a pest." As payments were handed out by church wardens, it seemed that no creatures could escape the list, ranging from badgers to hedgehogs, kingfishers to woodpeckers. One included on the list was the mole. This creature did not offer itself up to be taken as easy as others. This creature required special attention if it was to be taken. These strange characters that appeared in our countryside, in the fields and paddocks, were to become known as the mole catchers. As vermin takers sought the prize of a halfpenny for each life taken, the mole catchers worked to obtain that elusive mole. They may have already known of the previous methods to control moles, the simple clay pot devised by the Romans with its small hole halfway up to prevent it filling with water and allowing the mole to swim to freedom. But the mole catchers needed to be more efficient, more competitive, and more importantly, they had to be secretive if they were to survive. The mole catchers were not just secretive in what they did, but how they did it. The clay pots were not practical. They needed to find something more versatile, and they found the answer in the copse. They sought the fresh, sustainable growth of the hazel for the parts, and for the power, the flexibility of the willow. And for the restraints, they used snares, and for that, they turned to the horse. Having gathered their materials, they constructed a simple but effective device, which when pegged into the mole's tunnels, was a method to present some simple snares to restrain a mole. Like these old traditional mole catchers, I used to make and use these at a young age, despite the availability of the metal devices. It enabled me to fully understand the need for the correct positioning and presenting of a device for the capture of a mole. They were constructed from a simple block of wood. 5 holes were needed, and these were drilled, one in each corner and one in the middle. The hazel whips gathered from the copse were cut into smaller lengths, and then they were whittled down to expose the centre core. These were then shaped in the hand or with steam into a horseshoe shape. 2 were needed, one for each end, and these were pushed into the corner holes and provided support and housing for the snares. The snares were made from the hair taken from the tail of a horse. 6 strands plaited together made up the cord, which was strong enough to temporarily hold the mole. I used a simple dowel with a saw cut in it, in which I placed the strands of hair. I then locked them in, and now divide the strands into 3 pairs of 2, and then using a simple outer over the inside plat, I would form a cord that would make up the snares. The cords were threaded down through the hole, round the loop and back up through the other hole, knotted, and that would form the snare. The same at the other end, and the third cord was tied in the middle with a long tail and a short tail. The device still needed the power and the method of release. The power came from the willow, the flexible whip, and known as a bender stick. The release upon entry of any unsuspecting mole was achieved with this: a simple peg, again cut from the copse or the hedgerow. These Y-shaped pegs were located in the central hole of the block after the small tail of the centre cord had been passed through. With a small collar formed on the peg, it would withstand any upward force until it was dislodged by the target mole. These pegs needed to be kept safe and ready to hand, so they kept them held in the mouth, from which they became aptly and affectionately known as mumble pins. With the device pegged into the mole's tunnel and powered by a bent willow, the mole catcher would sit and wait for any movement in the stick and a possible prize. As well as waiting, they would also prowl, armed with a mole spud, a long-handled spade. Like a heron in a pond, they would wait for any mole working shallow and flicking from the sanctuary of the soil. On the other end is a metal spike, not for driving into the ground to find the tunnels as many people feel, but for driving into the ground to actually make a hole for the bent willow. For the old traditional mole catcher, making your own devices and retaining the knowledge of their use secured an income. The vermin takers were increasing in numbers, but fortunately for the mole catchers, these vermin killers, from their lack of knowledge to compete with the mole on an even playing field, remained exploiting the other numerous species on the vermin list. This allowed the mole catchers a freedom to offer these unique services, and they secured long terms for agreements, some as long as 20 years. We can, from the meticulous records of stately homes, parish clerks and other billheads, appreciate the lives of these old molars. However, during the 1800s, everything was to take a dramatic change. The new Victorian era brought many changes to Britain. The Industrial Revolution, with its mechanisation, changed the face of the countryside. Men that once worked the land lost their jobs to machinery and were forced to work in the factories making those very machines that tore them away from an existence undertaken by generations. It was to have a direct impact on the mole catchers too. Everyone was quick to exploit opportunity, and the path of the mole catchers was also to take a sudden change. One of these changes may have originated from a family from Goddington in Oxfordshire, the Turner family, during the early 1800s. I was given some old clay barrel traps by the grandson of a Thomas Turner, a mole catcher from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, and I looked back into the timeline relating to these new devices for the capture of moles. This Thomas Turner probably would not have used these clay barrels, as by his time many changes had been made, but these clay barrels were a change that was to set a benchmark for things to come. It was an earlier relative and another Thomas Turner that this change possibly originated from. This Thomas was not a mole catcher, but a brickmaker working in his local brickworks. How this device came about, we can only surmise, especially at a time when any and every income was important to a family. Head of the Turner household was Richard, an agricultural labourer, and it may have been from conversation at the meal table that talk turned to moles. Whether Richard heard talk of the need to remove the moles, but with the secret of how, now a closely guarded secret, this discussion possibly inspired Thomas to suggest the use of clay drainage pipes to house the snares, removing the need to make your own devices. The brickworks were producing small pipes, and with a slight change, could and were adapted for use against moles. Thomas the brickmaker may well have made these original devices and marked his pipes with the initials of those he made them for. This one displays RT, made for his father's ventures into the new concept of mole catching. Others we know had TT embossed on them, not for Thomas, but for Timothy, Thomas's younger brother. Timothy is later listed as a mole catcher in National Census, as was another brother, William, the father of Thomas Turner, the mole catcher from where this timeline was inspired. These clay barrels soon became in demand, and we later learned that other brickworks began to supply them, this one from W. Reed & Sons in Sussex. The concept of a barrel shape was now applying further pressure on the traditional mole catchers, as more sought the income from the taking of the mole. That demand on the mole catchers not only came from the new enterprise in barrels for the capture of moles, which were to change again, but also from a new weapon used against the mole, poison. The poison was strychnine. Created in France in 1818, it was soon also to impede on the lives of the traditional mole catchers. But before it did, further changes were being made. The clay barrels had introduced a completely new populace to the taking of moles, but the clay was impractical, and they sought a stronger material, one that would not be crushed under hoof and cartwheel. The need for a more practical barrel by those that used them drew them to the wheelwrights, the bodgers and the greenstick workers, those proficient in making things from timber, and the answer was found in elm. Strong and resistant to moisture, it was used as the hub of a wheel. It was from the strength in the elm that they learned that they no longer would require the power of the willow to power the snares still contained in the barrel. The intensity in the timber allowed for a metal wire shape to be fixed to the barrel, making it a self-contained device. This one, the Perfection, was a mass-produced device for the taking of moles. It was soon learnt that if they cut the barrel in half, they could get two devices for the price of one. The full barrels soon became known as the half barrels. Like the Turner family, marking the clay barrels with their initials, many chose to mark the timber barrels too. This one bears the mark of J.B., James Bassett, a mole catcher from Mildenhall in Suffolk. No longer lurking in the background, the poison strychnine was also competing with the new breed of mole takers for the old mole catchers' incomes. Wireworks began to produce everything from the now readily available metals, and soon turned to making devices for the taking of every living thing, including man, and the new term trap became common use. Moles were not to escape this flood of tools of torture, as patterns were submitted for every possible contraption for the seizure or restraint of fish, fur and feather. New engines for the taking of moles appeared. It seemed that it could not get any worse for the old mole catchers, but worse it certainly did. The Verming Act was repealed in the 1860s, and no longer were payments freely handed out for the life of an animal. The vermin takers had to change their ways and took the name of controllers of pests. From this sudden lack of income, they stepped up the pressure on pocketing the mole catchers' earnings. These new mole killers possessed no skill or knowledge, but armed with a jar of poisoned worms offered a cheaper option for the destroying of moles. Despite not producing any proof of a completed task, the poison was freely poked and pushed into the soil. Secondary poisoning was of no interest, as they competed with the mole catchers at every opportunity. The controllers of pests that once gained income from the repealed Verming Act now included to take from the mouth of the mole catchers. The controllers of pests were quick to employ both the poison and the new devices or traps against the moles. With metal springs, the new engines or traps were considered as fit for purpose for the taking of life, and having placed them out of sight, out of mind, they would be left until they sought fit to return, offering little concern to the mole. Under the term of progress, any welfare for the moles had taken a huge step backward, as no longer were the moles afforded the attention of the observant mole catcher watching for the movement of the willow. The true mole catchers sought employment wherever they could find it, and we have evidence of mole catchers travelling around the United Kingdom in search of locations that have not been infiltrated by progress. Many mole catchers remain true to the willow, are still prowling the fields and the paddocks and looking for the movement in the sticks and a bit to put food on their table. The original mole catchers never did disappear completely from the countryside, as the lack of knowledge of the moles by the new generation of mole killers often resulted in a failure to remove them, and the services of the traditional mole catchers that remained was requested when the new modern methods were unsuccessful. This photo, taken in 1909, shows an old character of the countryside still working the willow, despite the increasing types of modern metal traps available. It was only time before the traditional mole catchers began to ply their skills with the new devices too. The most popular trap at the time was the scissor or the pincer trap, and is still used today despite question over the humaneness of the device. One trap that was made available in the garden catalogues was the Anglo-Impassable, a spear or guillotine trap. These appeared in 1898 and were the brainchild of two Cornishmen, William Reed and James Lawry. They produced a Mark I, a Mark II and a 2A, with the main difference being that the loop on the top of the Mark I was a welded ring, and on the Mark II it was formed from the spring rod itself. Not practical and obviously not aimed at the professional market, but the gardener or the occasional mole trapper. So with many metal devices now available, it seems that the mole catchers were forced also to use these devices of torture. But the willow still had a place, as these metal devices had limitations. They could not always be used in the deeper tunnels, and the controllers of pests, lacking in knowledge or ability, soon declared that the mole catching had to be done when the moles were only working in the shallow runs. It was the opportunity that the old mole catchers had waited for, combining their old willow and hazel devices with the new metal traps, and the full understanding of how moles lived, they began to prise open doors. The understanding of the mole from that daily contact was to be the lifeline that allowed the mole catchers to return to the fray. They once again began to display their wares on posts and fences as once before. Landowners, unsure of the honesty through the lack of evidence to the results they were paying for, looked again to the mole catcher. But many old molars had fallen foul of the pressure and had either hung up their devices or taken on new employment. With the competition from poison failing to produce the evidence, the mole catcher's skill was once again in demand for another commodity. It was the mole's skin. Once again, the mole catcher's second income was secured, as they were paid once for the removal of the mole and again for the coat it wore. With the pelts required for the lining or making of garments and for the wipes of the hot pipe industry, the moles brought rewards for those that could and envy from those that could not. Maybe it was from this jealousy that the mole killers began to claim the title mole catcher in a bid to derail this newfound wealth. This poster offers 2 shillings for a dozen moleskins. The pelts were known as clears, and they were broken down into different categories. The supers were the winter pelts, and between 11 to 12 millimetres thick. These were the preferred pelts. Then came the firsts, good quality but not the standard of the supers. Then the seconds. These were the summer pelts, not as thick at 9 to 10 millimetres, but they must not be marked in any way. The thirds were both the summer and the winter coats that were in some level of malt, so would not have the consistency in their colour or thickness. Evidence of the malt can be found on the underside, on the dark patches displaying the changes in the hair. Then came the smalls and tainted. These were those used for the plumber's wipes. My full waistcoat that I am wearing come from 260 moles. Not all the pelts were used, as they needed to be graded and then cut into small hexagonal shapes that were sewn together for a consistent colour and allow for the garment to move. The waist was used for the trimmings and for pouches. Those superstitious folk also sought the help of the mole catchers, as it was believed that the wearing of a front foot around the neck would ward off evil, bring good luck, and avert toothache. The metal traps continued to change, and many variations can be found in museum collections and probably some garden sheds. The most common continued to be the scissor traps, but even these differed in various ways. These may look identical, but are powered by different styles of springs. This one has a wire shape, and this one is powered by flat springs. It was in 1920 that a change was made that was to transform the face of mole catching, with the invention of the half-barrel mole trap. It was the thoughts of a Scottish mole catcher, John Newton Duffus, that the half-barrel trap was created from. Based on the original barrel trap, the mole catchers cut in half and fitted a wire-shaped spring to, but it was from the constant contact with the moles and their environment that John produced a compact and more efficient device. It consisted of wire loops for snares to restrain the mole, which were powered by smaller springs and being compact, making it perfect for any depth of tunnel. It operates independently, so 2 moles may be captured at the same time, should the occasion arise. Although this trap was conceived almost 100 years ago, it has never been bettered, although it has been improved. These new traps John set about making himself and sold them around the world, and he sold the patent to a friend, David Jolly, in 1958. David continued to make these, along with his wife in his garden shed, with the occasional help from their children. Armed now with the compact metal devices, the mole catchers in the 20th century had a device that certainly simplified their working days. These new devices, when combined with the mole catcher's knowledge, was to impact on the mole population, as now moles could be taken from any location and any time. So having looked how matters were completed in previous years, let's bring things up to date and look at what options are available to mole catchers today. If you are to undertake the removal of a mole in the 21st century, you have a duty of care to ensure that your actions and the devices that you use are both acceptable and fit for purpose. It's not acceptable to cause deliberate suffering from the result of your actions. The Animal Welfare Act protects every animal that enters into a device placed for its restraint or capture. If the target animal does not enter into the device, then it is not protected, as no offence may have been committed. However, under this Act, it is also an offence to cause, even under the terms of pest control, any unnecessary suffering to an animal. And it will be down to the courts to decide what measures could or should have been taken to reduce or remove that suffering. A mole caught unintentionally alive in any device that is claimed to expire life is termed as unnecessary suffering. You may be unaware that most of our modern devices or traps used against moles still rely upon restraint or capture. Currently, there is no trap that is used for the removal of a mole that will, despite marketing claims, kill a mole instantly. Having carried out field testing with the devices, I have witnessed firsthand the performance, impact and the results these implements have upon target moles. The most important choice for any device will be the effectiveness and the humaneness of that chosen piece of equipment to complete the task. Therefore, let's look at what is obtainable to the modern mole catcher and how they work in relation to our target species, the mole. Still available are the Victorian scissor or pincer traps, and as with many patterns and options of that era, it's still of interest to modern manufacturers to make changes, the latest having a ratchet system for those with slightly weaker hands who may struggle opening the jaws. The scissor action, from which they gain their name, implies that they will close around the body of the mole. Similar in appearance and operation are the gripper traps. Now sold under the trade names of Talpax, they originated in England and were exported to the United States of America before the closure of the company back in 1969. They were for use against moles and gophers and sold as the outer sight trap. Having travelled the globe, they've been slightly changed and returned to the UK via the Netherlands. Variations on the scissor action devices have seen both spikes and serrated edges cut into the jaws, which must be questioned under the Mammal Act, which makes it an offence to stab, pierce or impale a mammal. Another trap, the trap line, imported from America, also has the intent to impale the target mole, as they have, according to the manufacturer's own descriptions, tines that close in on the mole. A tine is described as found on a fork to stab or impale, as is also found with this trap, imported from France. Another French trap, the poutang, is of concern from both its action and use. Both the trapline and poutang traps, from both the manufacturer and supplier's own admissions that they must be pegged or tied down to prevent the mole possibly dragging the trap away down the tunnel, suggest a live mole could be restrained like a fish on a line, and raises the question to the suitability and humaneness of what is currently available, and the stance of some of those people who use them. Placing the question mark over these traps, is there a trap that is more suitable? And that the answer is yes. The half-barrel trap, which with some small improvements has proven to be the most humane, providing it is positioned correctly. To analyse how these traps impact on the target mole, we need to look closely at the anatomy of the mole and what effect each trap will have on the body from the action of each device. The devices or traps available to us today operate in just two ways, either by the enclosure around the body from the side or below. Where any device strikes a target mole, it's vitally important for the effectiveness and humaneness of the result. To strike a mole from the side has been for many years the go-to point in the form of traps that operate in a scissor or closure action. This action is still mimicked, as we have seen, by many new imported devices. Where these chosen traps make contact with the mole's body varies from around the upper shoulders to the lower abdomen. To explain, I have a model of the mole from which we can clearly see what those influences will be. The skeleton of a body provides the framework and structure and protection for the softer tissues, so it's important to look for vulnerable points. I break the mole's anatomy down into three parts, and these are the areas where current devices used, it is alleged, will make contact. The first area, the thoracic cavity. This area contains the heart and lungs and is the only sealed compartment in the mole's body. Sealed as it has a membrane called the diaphragm, physically dividing it from the abdominal cavity. The abdominal cavity lies caudal or towards the tail to the thoracic cavity and contains the digestive system, liver and associated vessels. Flat sheets of muscle, of which the fibres running all directions, giving it great strength, form a protective abdominal wall. Caudal to the abdominal cavity is the pelvic cavity. The pelvic cavity houses the urinary system, rectum and reproductive organs. There is no physical barrier between the abdomen and the pelvic cavity. Any device that encloses around the mole from the side or below will, from their design, make a point of contact here in the shoulder region to the side of the thoracic cavity, the abdomen or the pelvic cavities, depending on certain criteria. That criteria is the size of the target mole, the speed of entry by the target mole into the device, and the point of release of that device. Let's look closer at these possible points of contact made by the devices used against moles. It is without doubt that the mole is a tremendous earth mover, and the power to create such devastation from above ground is accredited to its strength. The ability to tear and rip at the ground comes from the power in its shoulders, and that muscle is clearly visible here. This muscle group will absorb any force from a strike aimed to the side into this area. Further protection is afforded by the notable structure of the skeleton and the position of the scapular bones, which run parallel to the spine. They are a shield of bone providing additional protection to the thoracic cavity and the next line of defence, the rib cage itself. Therefore, any force applied to the mole from a sideways strike is clearly ineffective, and this is evidence of these devices providing only a restraint or capture of a target mole. Sideways closure around the mole at other points must also be considered, and a strike just behind the head in the abdomen and pelvic regions will occur from devices that operate in a sideways strike. The mole skeleton will offer little protection in the abdominal and pelvic cavities. Here the absorption of any force will be made from the flat sheets of muscle that form the wall and the internal organs. Like us, the mole's abdomen and pelvis contain a mass of soft tissue that make up the digestive and reproductive systems. This tissue can be damaged, but will not necessarily expire life instantly or quickly from its ability for these organs to move when compressed. Some claims are made of devices actually breaking the mole's spine. This is not possible. A strike in the mole's pelvic area is the only part of the anatomy that a force may affect the spinal area. The force required to cause substantial damage is not currently available on any device, and the point of strike will not allow any direct contact with the spine with enough force to cause any greater injury than to impart paralysis on the unfortunate mole. Another consideration is the travel of any device prior to its contact with the mole's body. With devices that operate in a scissor action or closure, that distance is minimal, so rather than a strike, the action is a squeeze. These are the distances of devices permitted from their own design. Any squeeze made to the mole in the cervical spine region again will only impart a restraint to the mole, as any sideways force will enclose around the area here. As a mole moves forward, it does with its front feet in the forward position, as you can clearly observe in this slow motion film of a mole naturally moving in its tunnel. With its feet in the forward position, you can see the added protection offered from the bones in the upper arms and the shoulders. Therefore, these bones corset any pressure applied here. With the mole's feet in a forward position, the scapular bones lay more horizontal, providing more protection to a sideways force. In addition, if you place your hands on the side of your throat and press in hard, you can still breathe normally. This is because the trachea is at the front of the neck and you cannot compress it by applying pressure from the side. Moles caught just behind the head are clearly only restrained until life expires from exhaustion, starvation or dehydration, and not from asphyxiation, as many claimed. The practice of pegging and tying traps down to prevent moles dragging them away upon capture is a clear admission to this restraining of moles. Often this pegging down is made under the disguise of a requirement to the efficiency to the use of the device. In 2008, I considered the issues raised from my findings, and following extensive field testing of the devices, one device offered itself up to slight modifications to address the welfare for moles whilst under the control of man by device or trap use. The half-barrel trap. I made and tested the changes, and it clearly made a huge impact on how this device terminated the life of the mole. The point of strike is the important consideration, and from below targets one vulnerable area that is accessible on the mole. The mole runs flat to the ground, so relies upon the base of the tunnel as its natural protection. By striking the mole from below, it exploits the lack of natural protection from the mole's body. That exposed point is here on the underside, but the strike must be to a part of the anatomy to cause acceptable damage. Strike a mole in the abdomen or pelvic areas will again only result in a restraint, but a strike to the thoracic cavity from below can impart the result required to ensure a humane end of life. Contained within the thoracic cavity, the heart and lungs are protected by a cage of bone. The design of that cage is to offer defence from injury from natural events such as attack. This cage has one failing, which the half-barrel trap can exploit. The mole does not expect to be attacked from below, and the flaw in the defence of the thoracic cavity is here. If we can apply enough force to the chest area, we can have an immediate effect on the life of the target mole. Strike the mole here with enough force and it will have devastating consequences. But how do we achieve this? And what is enough force? Utilising the half-barrel trap operation of an upward thrust, we can strike the mole in this area of its body. But it is not the strike that is important, but the termination of that force. The whole procedure relies upon combined criteria of the mole's natural bodily functions and imparting trauma from the action of the device. To explain as simply as I can, inside the thoracic cavity, in addition to the heart and lungs, are membranes that create a divide or space between areas. These are known as pleural spaces. For the device to be effective, it must attack that pleural space, target the heart and to interfere with the function of the lungs. And the changes I made to the half-barrel trap, this was achieved. In 2004, the UK government commissioned a review of mole control as the use of the poison strychnine was to be withdrawn from use. Contained in that document, it was stated that the use of traps would be promoted if modifications to existing traps increase humaneness or new designs are developed. With that withdrawal of poison use coming into force in 2006, it was clear that with more people employing the use of traps as a method of controlling moles, that moles would be subjected to more contact with devices aimed at their demise. In 2008, working with top veterinary surgeons, I combined the anatomy of the mole, practical considerations and field testing to make a few simple changes to the half-barrel trap, resulting in a more effective and humane device. This is a half-barrel trap with the changes, and this one is not. It's very difficult to see what these changes are, so I will explain. First, let's look at the parts that make up the trap. Here, we have the trap body. 2 pairs of springs, which will provide the power or force. These are known as double torsion springs. 2 trap loops, 1 at each end for a double capture. 2 retaining bars, these hold the springs down until the release. And finally, 2 loops which have, like those small wooden twigs once used to release the old wooden devices with the horsehair snares, retain the name mumble pins. The largest mole encounter will be a male, and these weighing at no more than 120 grams and no longer than 150 to 175 millimetres in length. So these are the figures that I worked on. By using the maximum size of a target mole, it would obviously be sufficient for those smaller moles, providing for an even more humane control of moles. Contact to the mole's body in this area must be with enough force to instill injury, but most importantly to impart a fast as possible level of unconsciousness that the mole will not wake from. This is what is termed as TIU, the time to irreversible unconsciousness. To explain, when we as humans undergo operations, we are rendered unconscious so that we feel no pain. We are then woke from that state for a recovery. If we can place the mole in a state of unconsciousness, but also impart an injury from which it cannot survive, it will, whilst being unconscious, feel no pain, and life will expire during this period from the injury caused. The TIU is the time it takes from the moment the device operates to the mole being in that state of unconsciousness where it will feel no pain and will not wake from. This obviously needs to be as fast as possible. A sudden shock to the mole's thoracic cavity from below can achieve this. So for the largest mole, the action must have sufficient force to impart that shock, and the half-barrel achieves this by lifting, not striking the mole. Lifting the mole in a rapid motion imparts velocity to the mole in the chest area, and that velocity is then abruptly terminated as it makes contact with the trap body. This sudden stop will shock the mole, rendering it unconscious. It has been witnessed for a mole to be rendered motionless instantly. In addition, this appropriate force directly to the region of the heart can cause immediate death from a cardiac arrest. This velocity must be sufficient to raise the largest of moles, so a minimum of 6 kg spring force is required. Most half-barrel traps will employ a 4 kg spring. To ensure that force is applied evenly across the mole's chest area, the base of the trap loop must be flat. This will thrust the mole upwards evenly and vertically. If a trap loop is round or angled at the base, it will lose some of the velocity as the mole's body rolls into this rounded area, and the impact will be lost to the side wall of the thoracic cavity and absorbed by the strength and flexibility of the wider ribs. With the mole on its journey upwards, that termination must be, as stated, abrupt, and to achieve this the trap body needs to provide a solid obstruction, so a thickness of no less than 2 mm, and the trap must be set tight in the tunnel to avoid any movement and therefore loss of velocity in the operation. Thrusting the mole upwards to impart the fastest TIU possible, or a cardiac arrest, is the primary aim, but the main objective is to impart a blunt trauma injury to the pleural spaces. The violent termination of the involuntary movement to the mole's chest area as the mole's spine contacts the trap body will be followed by the continued force from the trap loop punching the smaller ribs into the cavity, causing damage to the membranes that form the pleural spaces. This force may cause a rib to puncture the space or lung. By damaging the pleural spaces we cause two further possible injuries, from which the mole cannot survive. These are a hemothorax or a tension pneumothorax. The hemothorax relies on the moles being haemophiliacs and the fact their blood will not clot, and therefore damage to the pleural space will cause blood to enter this space and apply pressure to the lung, resulting in a failure to breathe. The pneumothorax will allow air to enter the space, which again will cause a lung collapse. It may also, from the pressure, restrict the blood flow back to the heart via the artery and cause a cardiac arrest. For these injuries to occur, that point of strike by the trap loop must be applied to the correct areas every time, and to any size of mole that may enter the device. This is achieved by moving the mumble pin, the trap part the mole pushes to release the force of the spring. Move it slightly towards the trap loop. With it set vertically, it will enable the strike to be made in the appropriate part of the chest area to any mole. Despite the recommendations of the government's own findings, these changes have not been made to every half-barrel trap. Combined with good working practices and possible further changes to the devices that we use, will provide the best level of welfare for the target moles, whilst under the control of man. As well as your chosen trap or device, what else do we need to remove a mole? Let's look at some of the other items that, as a mole catcher, I use to enter into this extraordinary world. The tools that I use to enter the world of the mole are both simple and effective. My kit comprises of very few items: probes to locate the tunnels, hand trails to enter that world, a runner to assist me in a correct presentation, some tools to cut, some sharpening stones, and trap markers to remind me where things are. Everything is kept safe to hand in my bag. The bag presents a professional approach and attitude to the work that I do. If a doctor was to be seen arriving at your door with his prescriptions and stethoscope, say in a plastic bucket, it would not instill much confidence to the professionalism of the occupation. So consider what impression you portray to your clients when you embark on the role of mole catcher. It cannot be emphasised enough for the need to minimise the amount of damage you do to the mole's environment when mole catching. And the more damage you do to the mole's environment, then the more it will do to yours. And that first contact you have can be the difference to success or failure. That connection with the tunnels to pinpoint the location for your device will be made with a probe, and the choice of probe is important. The mole, when moving through the tunnels, will run with its tail in the air. It will maintain contact with the roof of the tunnel in the same way as a dodgem car seen at the fun fair. The mole has an acute nervous system which is stimulated by stiff hairs on its body called vibrissae, and these are found on its face, rear feet and tail. The mole's tail will detect any excessive damage to the roof of the tunnel, so you must keep that damage to a minimum, and the choice of probe can have an influence. I never use a probe thicker than 10 mm, normally 8 mm, as these diameters will keep that damage to a minimum. Thick probes will possibly cause unnecessary damage, alerting the mole to your intentions, and I accept that the thicker the probe, the easier it is to feel the presence of a tunnel, especially in wet ground. But with practice, it is possible to locate the tunnels with a thinner diameter probe and evade damage to the tunnel. You must remember, the points in the tunnel you are probing may not always be the position that you will finally locate the device for capture, so use the probes with a thinner diameter. Having located your tunnel, your next step will be to enter into this mysterious world, and I will take you systematically through the process of placing a device for the removal of a mole later. We've already learned that the mole is equipped with the perfect set of tools for digging. To enter this remarkable world, we also require the ideal tool, and I believe there is nothing better than a good garden hand trowel. We need a tool that will allow access without causing damage, a tool that will permit an accurate entry to permit the correct fitment of the device. The best hand trowels for this are those with a straight blade and a straight tang. The tang connects the handle to the blade. This potting trowel has a basin shape to the blade and a bent tang, so therefore should really be avoided. Trowels with a straight blade and tang allow for the perfect straight cut downward and will not cause unnecessary damage to the tunnel. The term cut is important as you need the trowel to cut a path down, slicing through any small root and penetrating through the soil to leave a good vertical slice at each cut. For this, you need to keep the trowel sharp, and an edge can be achieved on an abrasive wheel, and in the field it can be honed with a hand sharpening stone. Soils that have more weight, longer thick grass or frozen will need some extra leverage to remove the upper organic layer, and the hand trowels may lack that ability to prise the heavier ground. That is where a Japanese garden trowel is an ideal option. It has a thick steel blade and a tang which continues into the handle, so more leverage can be applied. It may be difficult to find good quality hand trowels suitable in the retail shops, but the antique shops selling garden implements often have the perfect trowel. This is what I call a runner. I introduced this to my mole catching over 15 years ago to aid my presentation of my device to the mole. I will explain its use later, but it is a simple method to eliminate mistakes that could be the difference between catching the mole or not. Marking your device once it has been placed is not so important if you're catching in your own garden. But if you're catching moles for others, it is vital that you can recall where they are positioned. Also for others to know that a device is present and to keep non-target species or third parties away and from disturbing the area. I use sticks cut from the copse, painted white at the top, which are fine. But if you're working in areas such as fields and paddocks with the presence of wildlife, then choose a nylon marker, as these are not favoured as something to pull out and chew on by rabbits, sheep, etc. And nylon lasts longer. Marking with red top nylon markers also identifies to others such as tractor drivers and overexcitable users of lawnmowers to avoid the area. Before we put these tools and devices to use, it is required to understand more about the mysterious mole, as understanding how they live undoubtedly reduces mistakes and increases your success. Following prolonged or heavy rainfall, the ground can become waterlogged, possibly saturated. It will become deficient in oxygen. It will force the food vital to the moles to move to new areas or higher ground. And in circumstances like this, well, this speaks for itself. But the impact on the environment has a huge influence on the mole, who requires 2/3 of his own body weight in food a day just to survive. Moles will move to different areas just to find that vital food, often resulting in claims of a mole population boom by those people who don't really understand this amazing creature. Wet and damp are vital for the moles if they are to move around, when they are required to locate and create new feeding grounds, and of course when they need to find each other at their breeding times. They need to travel around safely and as efficiently as possible, and they achieve this with what I call natural drip. Our countryside is scattered with dividing lines, fences, hedges and walls, structures to keep livestock in, predators out, and to establish the boundaries of ownership. Under these fences, hedges and walls is what we call natural drip. Every day the rain and the dew will drip down, so after a period of time, a certain distance down and a certain distance out, the moisture content in the soil will be perfect to maintain a tunnel. You won't see any molehills, but the tunnels are there. If you get wet soil, you put it in your hand, put your finger in, wangle it around, pull it out. Nothing touches your finger, but you've made a pipe. It's the secret world beneath your feet. It's the mole's motorway systems. It's how they get around. It's a system they've been using for thousands of years. If you're a mole catcher, this is one of the first places to look when you're positioning your traps. These tunnels, constructed beneath the lines of natural drip, play an important part of the mole's very existence, as without these they would not be able to move around freely at that vital time of the year when they need to increase their numbers to exist as a species. Obviously that time of the year is the spring. Spring is a time for new growth and new life. That time is determined by nature herself, and it's no different for the moles. Moles live almost solitary lives and must come together at least once a year to exist as a species, and that time is decided with the warming of the soil. That warming can take place as early as late February, early March in the south, and a little later as the ground warms in other parts of the country. The moles embark on a chemical change. The female moles will come into season and the males will increase levels of testosterone. It's a change that permits them to tolerate each other, if only for a very short while. Males, fueled with enthusiasm, will leave their normal areas in search of available females. This can be evident in the lines of molehills as they instinctively create new or open up old tunnels, some possibly not used since the last breeding season. Having found any available female, they will mate and go off in search of another, and the progression continues. This ensures all the available females are expectant for the existence of the species. The females, having conceived, will be required to increase areas of available food to provide for both their own needs and that of rearing and weaning the new offspring. This will be obvious in the sudden increase in damage to existing or new areas as they devastate the land like a rampant housing developer. Unlike our own development to an area, moles will only require this devastation to occur for a short while, as after the new brood have left at around 5 to 6 weeks of age, the land will return as it was, the young having left for pastures new, and the female no longer in need of such a large area to fulfil her needs. The land will rest until it all begins again the following spring. This movement of the male moles in spring often catches people out, as the sight of a line of molehills is considered a good place to position a device. But the mole responsible for the damage is normally long gone, and any mole caught wasn't staying anyway. The increased damage from tunnel construction not only occurs in the spring breeding time, as many landowners will testify. Moles will never miss an opportunity to harvest what is available, so you can experience large areas of damage at any time. If they happen upon excess food available, they will store it in special chambers called worm larders. These small chambers are full of worms they have gathered, each one incapacitated by a bite to the head. These worms will lay in a state of diapause until the wound heals, around 28 days. Incidentally, the gestation period of a female mole is just 28 days. The world of the mole is a complex network of tunnels which it uses to travel to areas, source its food and to raise its young. The harsh environment that is the kingdom of the mole is unforgiving and requires unique abilities for it to survive, and as a mole catcher we need to understand just how the mole feels and responds to the demands from living below ground. It finds security from the creation of a labyrinth of tunnels and runs, and sustenance in an abundance of fare, if you know where to find it. Soil never stops giving. The life it contains is the existence for all moles, as it provides for us in the growth of the things we eat. It also grants the mole life in what it can harvest from it too. The mole's existence is all about food, and requiring approximately 2/3 of its own body weight per day. Finding and reaping the rewards of that effort is vital if they are to survive. A large amount of energy is required in the creation of the tunnels, so a mole will not and cannot dig without the incentive of a full stomach at the end of such labour. Perfectly designed for life underground, Mole's senses are adapted to inform them of every element that may impose upon its life. To compete with a mole on an even field, you must know the rules of engagement, and it is the mole that sets those rules, as every location will be different, as the demands are evaluated and responded to by each and every mole. So we need to also understand how they live their lives. Moles are not blind, but have two perfectly formed eyes like you and me, which can be seen in this footage of a mole I filmed naturally in its own environment. The stopped frame clearly shows the mole's eyes open as it approaches the camera. The cameras, unlike the mole, require light assistance in this dark world, and the use of infrared light is required. The mole's ability to detect these light spectrums out of the range of humans is clearly proven in the response of the mole as it returns the tunnels to the darkness and the sanctuary it bestows. The combination of darkness and confinement is security against predation, and that security is shared as the passageways become a preferred haven to other creatures. Mice and voles are happy to exploit the efforts of the humble mole, but their presence comes with a price. A predator to hunt the tunnels is the weasel. Small enough to enter the tunnels, the weasel is in fact not primarily after the mole, but its preferred diet of the small rodents. The weasel hunts on the nose, following the scent of its prey, and will feed upon any unfortunate mole it may stumble upon. However, the mole has an ability to escape. The mole's world is a labyrinth of tunnels of varying depths. The lower tunnels will be what is known as a hypercapnic environment. That is one with high levels of carbon dioxide. The mole produces bicarbonate in its body to compensate this. Buffering the effects allows it to live in such an environment. Combine the ability to survive in these conditions and an acute knowledge of every tunnel, the mole rarely succumbs to predation from such an adversary. We know moles are not blind, have an acute knowledge of every tunnel, and can outwit the weasel with ease. But living in a permanently dark world, how do they find the food so vital to their needs? Moles were once classified as insectivores, as they are an animal that eats insects and worms. But recently that has changed, and they are now classified as eudypotifleurs, which I believe lists them with animals that are classed as fat and blind, two characteristics they definitely are not. The mole only has approximately 3% of its body weight as a fat content. They are lean and powerful for their size, and as we have seen, they are not blind. Their diet is completely made up of the bugs and grubs that they harvest from the soil, and of course earthworms are a favoured choice. They do not, despite claims, eat the roots of plants or chew on vegetables. This damage is caused by the rodents, which we know exploit the tunnels made by the moles. Tunnels under flower beds and veg patches are constructed from the presence of food, encouraged by the enrichment, watering and tender care of man. It is our changes that encourages the food vital to the moles to an area, and they will respond to its presence. If we look closer at the skull of a mole, we can clearly see the mole is designed for meat consumption. 44 teeth, including canines for the tearing and chewing of the flesh. Finding this food is achieved by detecting the vibrations made as a worm, bug or grub moves through the ground. Obviously the moles can hear, and we can see the auditory tubes here that funnel sounds into the skull of the mole. But the mole does not need the hearing of a mouse. Tunnels constructed by the moles will also act as sound tubes, like those once used on ships to communicate between the bridge and the engine room. It is the mole's acute nervous system, stimulated by those stiff hairs, the vibrissae, that once again provide the information to the mole to the presence of the sustenance. As a worm moves through the ground, it will create a noise, a sound wave that, although may not be audible, can be detected as a form of energy by the vibrissae. These constant waves will provide the mole with the information it requires to evaluate the presence of other life in the ground, and more important, if it will sustain the mole. The mole understands its environment in many ways, and it also has a special organ called an Eimer's organ in its nasal area. Named after the German zoologist Theodor Eimer, who in 1871 discovered this in the mole. It can be filled with blood by the mole to increase the sensitivity. It can be seen in a live mole, but cannot be seen in one that has expired life. Here you can see the pink area, and this is the area of the organ. The Eimer's organ provides the mole with the information of airflow, air pressure, humidity and temperature. These 4 factors are very important when competing with a mole, as you will learn very shortly. So the moles find their food from the vibrations created in the ground. Incidentally, the consideration for vibrations as a deterrent for moles has been going on for many years, with gadgets like this being sold. You don't need me to tell you that vibrations attract the moles. Nature doesn't lie, she has no reason to lie. How many of you have seen the big bird line dance? The gulls, the rooks, the crows, even the humble blackbird joins in, stamping all over the ground. And why do they stamp all over the ground? To create the vibrations, to bring the food to the area. So vibrations, they're bringing the mole to a garden near you. So having found the food, the mole's got one more task to do. He has to create the tunnels and the runs that link to those areas, and then create the passageways and corridors from which to harvest from. So let me explain to you now how moles actually dig. The digging movement of the mole is limited by its own design. The forelimbs in the forward position are in line with the mole's snout, which limits the available space from which to work. It overcomes this by simply turning its head to one side. This allows for a greater area of working space to this side. Turning the head to the other side creates this same space on this opposite side. This movement, in the way the mole digs, is known as the lateral thrust. The mole begins by bracing itself with one forelimb. Then it will move the other across and twist so that the palm faces out. And it will thrust the limb out, tearing at the ground with its claws. It will repeat it before changing limbs and working at the other side. Repeating the process will create the tunnel. Those of you who were observant may have noticed in that example of a mole digging that the mole has 6 fingers. By holding this larger model of a mole's forelimb against my own hand, you can see this 6th finger is set here, just before the thumb on each hand. Called a sesamoid bone, it is covered in skin to form a paddle, so the mole is equipped with 5 pickaxes and a shovel on each hand. In the 21st century, man still relies on the ancient ways to remove moles. There are no regulations, no rules, no approvals, so it's down to those undertaking mole control to provide the correct and best working practices. Sadly, that doesn't always happen. So I'd like to explain to you now how I catch moles, which I believe provides the highest level of welfare for any target mole. Welfare for moles whilst under the control from man begins at the very beginning, and that starts with the location of the tunnel. Locating the mole's tunnel is not as difficult as first believed. Let me break a myth. They cannot fly, so they have not just dropped out of the sky to the middle of the lawn. I've already explained that you should consider all possible areas of natural drip to find how they get around. They will enter from the perimeter, so the first place to consider is this area. A molehill appears. 20 minutes later, it's like this. Then more will appear as the mole, if deciding it is providing its needs, continues to work the ground. Moles cannot afford to dig for no reward or reason. The effort to claw and remove the soil must have some calorific gain. So let's look at the scenarios. This line is our perimeter and represents a fence, wall, hedge, whatever you prefer. The mole has entered from the perimeter point A. The cluster of molehills at point B indicates further working. The space between point A and point B is the location to consider for the placement of your device. Here the mole has created a tunnel out, and that tunnel will link the perimeter to the first molehill. The mole will use this tunnel to move to the area of molehills where it expects to find its food. Along this tunnel, the mole will move at speed, as it has no variations or runs or tunnels leading off. It moves at speed as having no escape options, it could be vulnerable to any possible attack. The space between point A and point B is the location to consider for the placement of your device. It is important to avoid putting your device amongst the molehills. Here will be a complex network of tunnels in which the mole will be cautious, looking for food and creating new tunnels and cleaning out the existing ones. Placing a device here increases your chances of finding your device full of nothing but soil. The devices used against moles are unforgiving in their intentions to restrain. Placing any device amongst molehills will increase the possible chance of an indiscriminate capture, either by the forelimb or the face. This is because in these areas the mole is in its search or work mode, either searching for food or moving soil. This results in a slow, cautious entry into the device. Also, if a device is located by the mole, it will, in the only way it knows, deal with it. It will bury it. This can also result in a capture by the forelimb as it pushes soil forward. Also, upon discovering a device, a mole may turn so it is facing away from it in a defensive mode. It will turn so it has its rear to the danger, and using its rear feet fill the device and tunnel with soil. This allows the mole free and immediate movement away from the danger and leaves you with a device full of soil. Placing your devices in and around molehills will result with them being packed with soil. So consider my advice on location and choose a location between the perimeter of the property and that first molehill. Having decided upon the location for your device, you now need to pinpoint that tunnel. And this is where the probes come to work. The probes are very important. Their most important part of this is because this is the only contact you will have with the mole's environment from above ground. It's important to get this right and to learn the information that these tools can give you. As I've stated, I only use an 8mm probe normally, 10mm maximum, and for the reasons I stated earlier, I don't want to damage the mole's environment any more than necessary. My 8mm here are worn down slightly. One of them's got a bullet shape. That needs to be filed flat now. So it just gives me the information a little bit clearer, but I use these on a daily basis so I don't have that problem. But with your probes to start with, make sure that your tips are flat. Your probe needs to be an extension of your arm, and you'll need to push it into the ground smoothly and gently to absorb that information it can provide. And to do that, I prefer a handle like this. Some people buy probes and they have a T-shaped handle on it. A T-shaped handle tends to encourage more force. More force will actually push it into the ground and you won't absorb the information it's providing. You need something with a handle that's going to give you that information, not something with a handle you'd find on a gravedigger's spade. As you gently push the probe through the soil, you will experience a sudden give if it locates a tunnel. By pinching the probe at the surface level and removing it, it will also reveal to you the depth of that tunnel. You need to confirm the direction the tunnel is travelling, and this can be achieved by probing down in the direction of either towards the perimeter or the molehill. So having found your tunnel, move slightly in one direction and again push down slowly until the give is felt. Then repeat in the other direction. You're trying to establish that the tunnel is as straight as possible and it will accept your device. In my case, the half barrel, my preferred device for the reasons I explained earlier. When choosing the tunnel that links between the perimeter and the first molehill, there should not be any side tunnels, but it doesn't do any harm to check. Just simply probe down each side just to be sure. Having pinpointed the tunnel and confirmed its direction and there are no side runs, drop or lay the probe down, pointing towards the middle of the location the device is to be placed. You will forget exactly, and you do not want to have to repeat the process and disturb the mole's environment any more than necessary. If you decide to use a half barrel device, you can actually use it as a guide to assist you in your probing and location of the tunnel. It's very simple. Let me show you how. If you are using the trap as a guide, having found the tunnel, place the trap central to that first probe, and then remove the probe and probe slightly to one side, either towards the direction of the perimeter or the molehill. It matters not. Probe down again and locate the tunnel. Then repeat the process on the other side. This will establish the direction of the tunnel and ensure that the tunnel will accept the length of the device. Having found the correct tunnel for your device and the reasons for the location for placing it there, it's now time to get up close and personal. When we open up a mole's tunnel, we make instant and dramatic changes to the mole's environment. By understanding the mole and how they experience their environment, we can eliminate mistakes that can lead to unnecessary suffering or a failure of capture. The first consideration is what information and awareness do the moles have in relation to the actions that we take. And it all begins with the movement of the mole in the labyrinths beneath our feet. It's important to know that a mole moving through the tunnel will affect the air flow and air pressure in the environment. It is achieved as the mole will mimic the principle of a bicycle pump. Like the piston in the pump, the mole will move forward and create a positive pressure in front of itself and a negative pressure behind. That positive and negative air pressure is constantly being monitored by the moles via the Imer's organ. Remember, it is constantly monitoring the airflow and air pressure. So the mole passes through the tunnel. This organ is continuously informing the mole that all is well or not. It's important not to allow what we do to change this information to such a point that the mole will respond with either avoiding that tunnel or doing what it does best, filling up your placement area with soil. The choice of device has an effect upon the airflow and air pressure in the tunnel. The half barrel device does without question make smaller changes to that mole's environment. The half barrel, when positioned in the tunnel correctly, minimises the filling of the device with soil, as it has less impact upon the important flow and pressure of the air in the tunnel. The half barrel, from its design of replacing the tunnel roof that is required to be removed to enter the mole's world, will allow the flow of air to pass through and under the device. Devices that do not allow for any reinstating of the tunnel roof will allow changes to the airflows and pressure. The putang and trapline devices are inserted down and into the tunnel and are either pegged down or tied to prevent any possibility of the mole dragging the device away upon capture. So the placement may involve either a backfilling of the shaft made to enter the tunnel or a covering at surface level. Either will have a direct influence upon the airflow and pressure, and often will result in a failure to capture, due to the mole filling the placement area with soil, or more often an improper and inhumane capture of a mole around the head area or the forelimb. The practice of backfilling is used with the gripper style of devices, which rely upon the target mole having to reinstate the tunnel by removing the soil. Obviously, this will often result in captures from the side to the upper body or to a forelimb. These examples of the importance of understanding the movement of air and the influences our devices will have upon it supports my reason for the use of the half barrel trap. Entering into the mole's environment should not be taken lightly, as there are other considerations. When we enter into the mysterious world beneath our feet, we allow changes to occur that compare to those that affect our own. My wife can feel a draft in our cottage the instant it enters a room, so consider what a mole can experience when a door from the outside world is swung open. The airflow and pressure will change, as will the quality of the air. We know that a mole will detect fresh air, but it can also detect changes in the temperature and humidity. That IMERS organ that monitors airflow and air pressure once again comes into play, as it will provide instant changes and information about both the humidity and the temperature. The difference is easy to see when we look closely. The device on the left, device 1, is monitoring the ambient temperature and the humidity. Device 2 is monitoring the internal temperature and humidity of the mole's tunnel via a cable sensor. The ambient temperature is 27.6, humidity is 46%. The temperature inside the tunnel is 25.6 and the humidity is 56%. A 2-degree drop in temperature and a 9% increase in humidity after just 15 seconds. My monitors are not high tech, but they clearly enable us to see the difference between the ambient temperature and the environment that the mole lives in below ground. This is after 30 seconds. After 1 minute, the ambient temperature remains the same, 27.8 and 45% humidity. However, it's clear to see the changes in the mole's environment below ground. The temperature had dropped by 4 degrees and the humidity had increased by 14%. After 2 minutes, the ambient temperature remained almost the same. However, the temperature in the tunnel dropped even further to 18.2, minus 1.6, and the humidity increased by a further 8.6% to 82%. The depth of this tunnel was just 100 millimeters. Those monitors clearly show the difference between our world and the mole's, and provides the evidence for a prompt device placement, because any delay will allow fresh, warm, humid or cold air to enter, which will be responded to faster than my wife can put another log on the fire. But the moles have also got another trick up their sleeve. They have another sense. How do the moles find their way around a complex network of tunnels in the dark? They have what we call a kinesthetic sense. It's something we've got. How is it that you can reach out in the dark and find the light switch? How spooky is that? It's an imprinted pattern of memory, and the mole's kinesthetic sense is far greater than ours. They know every tunnel, every turn, every bend. If you find a tunnel that's got a slight bend in it and you straighten it, the mole will know. It's important not to allow our actions to influence the mole's environment in any way. So when we place a device, it must be carried out with speed and accuracy. It should take no more than a minute to open up the ground, place a device and cover it over again. But it has to be carried out accurately. You have probed and located the tunnel. You're now ready to enter into the mole's world, but this needs to be carried out quickly and accurately. If you're using a half-barrel device, time can be kept to a minimum if you have all the tools required to hand and the device set ready for use. Setting the half-barrel trap is not difficult, but take care as they will bite. You will have to do this with dry, warm hands to start with. Don't go out on a cold, frosty morning and do this for the first time. Try to do it in the comfort of your home. Try to get it in a comfort environment, gain confidence with the device. It's very simple. Just to recap the parts, we have the trap body, we have the trap loops, which are attached to the trap springs, the retaining bars, we have one at each end, and underneath we have the mumble pins, which will release the device when the mole enters. The setting is quite simple. You push down on top of the springs, which will depress the loop. The retaining bar is then brought over and apply pressure with the thumb holding it down, and you want to connect these two hooks together. The hook on the top of the mumble pin locates to the hook on the retaining bar. It's that simple. Okay, and then you turn the trap round and repeat the other end. So the trap spring is depressed, the loop goes down, the retaining bar comes over, it then locates with the hook on the top of the mumble pin, and the trap is set ready for use. It is basically that simple. I cannot stress enough the importance of the half-barrel device being correctly positioned into your chosen tunnel. I often hear of people passing on the advice of how to place a device, and they are passing on the advice without really knowing the reasons for the advice they are giving. So I'd like to take you through this on a step-by-step process so that they too will know these reasons. Until you become proficient in placements, like with the probing, you can once again use the half-barrel device as a guide. Your probe will be pointing to the middle of the chosen position the device is to be placed. So once again, place your device central to the location. You need to cut the tunnel slightly smaller than the half-barrel device, and a guide is to cut from the end of the trap to the point in the trap body where the opposite loop passes through. This will provide you with the perfect size to ensure a tight fit lengthways. The first most important piece of advice I give you is never cut your hole too large lengthways. You can get away with making small mistakes on the width, but you cannot make any mistakes lengthways. This is my reason for using small hand trowels, so you can get up close and work personal. Some people choose to use long handled spades, but you're working too far away from your chosen placement area, and you can't cut accurately. Maybe it's just a fad that they still believe that they should have a mole catcher's spud, but we no longer prowl the fields looking for the unsuspecting mole to flick him out of the soil. You can cut around the device using it as a template, which emphasises my point of having a sharp trowel and one with a straight blade. Having cut round it and marked it out, you can then open up the shaft. Remove the turf and any loose soil, and then feel with the fingers to confirm the direction of the travel and if there's any obstructions just inside the tunnel. Never push a stick or a rod into the mole's tunnel. Why would you? If you used a sharp trowel to cut into the mole's environment, you should have done minimal damage to the tunnel. There's no need to start pushing sticks and rods into the mole's tunnel for any reason. You could damage the tunnel on the mole's approach to your device, alerting the mole to your intentions. You now have a shaft down into the tunnel that should be slightly smaller than your device. You can position the device into the tunnel to make a test fit. The device goes in at an angle. You push it in at the angle and then you push it straight down. This will completely fill the shaft and maintain the tunnel shape. Having positioned the device, you now again remove it. Removing it will allow the tunnel to reveal some secrets. The trap body will have cut into the sides of the tunnel. It will leave some lines where these parts of the trap body act like blades. You need to look closely to see these lines, and they will identify any part of the tunnel that the device requires removing for it to locate correctly. Use the blade of the trowel like a chisel and cut the soil away as required. When you first position the device, due to it being slightly larger than the shaft, you will have allowed some soil to fall into the placement area. Again, with the finger, ease it from the tunnel entry and remove it with your hand, along with any soil cut or scraped from the shaft as identified by your positioning of the device. Further secrets that the mole's environment may reveal to you could be roots and stones. Small roots will be cut by the trowel if it's sharp as it enters through the soil, but thicker roots will require some attention. Never try to pull the root out. You don't know how big that root is. It could damage your trap placement site. So you need to cut it. And you need to snip it off flush with the side walls. And to do this, you can use secateurs, but there's nothing finer than a long bladed knife. You can slide this down the side of the shaft and cut it off flush. If you find you have a stone, again, do not try to remove it. You don't know the full size of that stone. To deal with a stone, use the probe. You place the probe against the stone and apply firm but gentle pressure and ease it back into the soil out of the way to allow you a better placement for your device. When we place the device, we must align the top of the tunnel and the top of the trap body to allow the flow of air to pass cleanly through the tunnel as it did prior to our intervention into the mole's world. It matters not that the trap loops may be required to be set into the tunnel floor. It is most important not to change the airflow or pressure to an extent that the mole will detect it. Aligning the tunnel and trap body is vital, but also is attention to detail, and for those that have on occasions found the devices full of soil, it is the lack of small details that are the difference between success and failure. A mole in the main tunnel will be moving at speed and will maintain a contact with the tunnel floor with his underside at all times. This will smooth the tunnel floor and will in turn also have a direct effect on the airflow or air pressure. It is a small detail, but to leave the placement area as the mole expects to find it, we are also required to smooth the base of the tunnel. To smooth the base of the tunnel, most people will use the back of their hand. They will push the hand in and it will naturally form this shape. This is a basin shape. We don't want to create a basin shape in the base of the tunnel. We want it to be flat and smooth. This is where the runner comes into use. The smoothing of the base may seem a little extreme. However, it can influence the airflow or pressure, and it's common for people to over firm the base with, let's say, over exuberance, which is why I use the runner. I admit a slight basin may have little concern from a mole, but should a basin influence the airflow or pressure in any way, then I promise you the mole will know. The runner is simple to use. It must not be tapped down, but allowed to use the weight in the runner to gently smooth the tunnel floor. You place it on the base and gently rock it from side to side. In soft or damp soil, apply hardly any pressure, but if the ground is hard, you may need to apply just a little, just to smooth it over. Allow the runner to enter into the tunnel at each side to maintain the continuity of the tunnel floor. The runner will not enter into the tunnel far enough to do any possible damage. This will assist in leaving the tunnel as the mole expects to find it. You must always ensure that the device is positioned properly so that the mole enters cleanly and the device will operate to strike the mole correctly. Always consider the changes to the airflow or air pressure that you may have impacted upon with what you are doing. Cutting the tunnel too long in the length will immediately allow a loss of positive air pressure as it is forced up into the void above the device. This will inform the mole of changes and for it to take actions. If you've cut the entry into the tunnel slightly too wide and you're worried about the loss of positive air pressure, you can pack it on one or both sides with a little bit of turf, but you must pack it adjacent to the springs. Don't pack it where the loops are. You don't want to impede any operation of the loops. If it is slightly loose, you've got to pack it. You don't want to lose any of the velocity of the trap on its operation when it strikes the target mole. With the device tightly in position and the tunnel left as close as we can as the mole expects to find it, we now come to the next part. It's the part that most people make most simple mistakes with. It's the covering of the placement site. Covering to a molecatcher is important. It keeps the sun out of our eyes, the rain off our face, and allows us to prevent any changes to the mole's environment that may occur from a delay in our placement of our devices. The covering is done at surface level. There's no need to sprinkle any soil down the shaft on top of your device. Why would you? It's only going to create more resistance for the operation in those springs and could result in an improper capture. You need to maintain the void, and this must remain just that, a void. The void will allow the full operation of the device to operate unimpeded. The roof of the placement area must not in any way influence the mole's environment, so we must avoid using anything that could make any change, however slight. You never place a piece of wood over the top or a tile or anything plastic, as these materials will unnaturally affect the placement site. We try to leave the placement site as the mole expects to find it. We must allow what the mole expects to find to be present and what it does not to be absent. We can achieve this, but not with the use of these materials, which will create two obvious changes. The first is that they can act like a solar panel, and they will make changes to the temperature and the humidity in the area below. And we have seen these changes in both the temperature and the humidity between the mole's environment and our own. The other change these materials will make is they will create a permanently dry placement area. They will not allow moisture to enter at all. and in some circumstances we might require the moisture to enter. We can create this by using the materials that are readily available to us, and that is the soil and the turf. We do this in a reversal, using these materials by first creating a roof made from the turf we have removed. It may not be possible to just place the turf over the site, as it will just drop down, and placing a stick over to support sounds good, but I use what is to hand, and that is more turf. The sharp trowel will slice a piece of turf which can be replaced later. I position the pieces of turf in a pitched roof shape. This roof does not need to be huge, you're only creating a support over the void. But ensure that the turf is grass side up, not grass side down. Grass naturally grows to the sun for a reason. To support the pitched roof, we take the soil we have removed, and we can use some soil from a nearby molehill, and we place it around the pitched turf. This will stop it from collapsing in. We then take further soil and place it over the top of the whole placement area to the same height as the tunnel is deep. So if the tunnel is 150 millimeters deep, cover over with 150 millimeters of soil. This is now mimicking the area around it in the same way. It is the small details that make a difference. It is important for the turf to be grass side up, as the rate the rain will pass through will be different to that if the grass is side down. Small details, but they make a difference. With a covering from turf and soil, the temperature and humidity will be the same below in the void and the tunnel, where the devices are located. No changes can enter to affect the light or air, but what is important is that we can mimic the moisture and allow it to enter as the mould expects to find it, again both in the tunnel and on the approach to the device. By ensuring that the moisture can enter as it would normally, we can reduce the changes that may occur if we took less attention to detail. With the soil and turf over the void as close as we can get to the surrounding area, we can lower the chance of the mould detecting changes. As it rains, the moisture will travel down, and if our covering is as close as we can achieve, the moisture levels will be unaffected. However, if the tunnel was 150 millimeters deep and we only covered over to a height of say 40 millimeters, then it is obvious to see what will occur. Should the rain soak down to only here, it is not actually impacted upon the tunnel, but because of an inappropriate height in our covering, moisture can soak down and enter the void, affecting the mould's environment and immediately informing the mould of any change. Covering is most important when you are faced with a mould that is working just below the surface. We call this running spooked, scribbling or jigging. The moulds do this to traverse from one point to another more safely, or more often to locate a food source. The half barrel device is perfect when the mould is working shallow, as it will enable us to replace the tunnel and leave it as the mould expects to find it. In the soil, the tunnels will be visible, and it will be easy to locate the device. Just scrape aside the soil gently and you will expose the tunnel. Do not expose a lot, just enough to determine the direction and enough to be able to clean out some of the loose soil without damaging the tunnel further. Just position the device into the tunnel. Some soil will fall in, but leave it. Do not remove the device. The mould will expect some soil to enter as the ground will naturally subside. If the mould is running spooked in grass, then it may look like a badly fitted carpet. It is just pushing up the organic layer. In this situation, the light will not be entering, but the moisture will be, and we need to mimic what the mould anticipates. The tunnel can be opened up with a sharp trowel or the blade of the Japanese garden trowel. Cut the shortened length as before, and then make a cut down the middle. Fold the tunnel back to expose it, and then position the device. Covering in the loose soil, we can gently sprinkle loose, light soil over the top. A good quality half barrel device should have enough force to strike a mole despite the resistance, but I cannot stress enough that it needs to be a good quality device. Under the turf, the light will not be entering, so we must block it out. we build a pitch roof over the top of the device, one that will allow the springs to operate unimpeded, then cover with soil to seal the covering. I cannot stress enough the importance to leave your device in any location in such a way that the mole will not find it. Consider your covering carefully and always ensure what you do will allow the device to operate to its full ability. Having positioned your devices, you may be required under health and safety to mark their locations, and natural sticks are good for this. However, they will be pulled from the ground and chewed by certain wildlife. This is where nylon is a favoured material. It's less desirable to them. Also, if someone was to fall on it, it won't cause any puncture wounds because it'll just bend. And again, machinery, if they drive over it, it won't do any damage. Some people do choose to use these wire pegs with plastic tape tied to them. The plastic tape is desirable to these fellas who will chew on it and digest it. Once they've chewed the tape from the wire peg, you're left with an invisible hazard which can cause damage to machinery and harm to third parties. Vet bills for ingested plastic tape, litigation for injury, you would think would be reason enough to have a concern over the placement of a device. And on a commercial basis, you do have an obligation to make assessments for those who may be at risk from your actions. Therefore, it would be reasonable and best practice to inspect the location within a reasonable time following its placement, for any changes that may occur that are directly out of your control. What could possibly go wrong, and what is reasonable? Many insist that moles move in blocks of time, ranging from 4 or 8 hours. This was assumed following laboratory studies of moles which were carried out over 50 years ago. If only this was so, it would certainly make their control a lot easier. In the wild, it's a different story. Moles live in an almost permanently dark world. They're not influenced by the sun or the moon. When they're tired, they will sleep. When they're hungry, they will feed. They have no perception of time, like we have no insight into when they'll enter a device. Your device is out of sight. We cannot see what is happening from the moment we walk away until the point we return. Your choice of device will target the mole in different places. You may choose to use the half-barrel device, and if you use one like I use, with the correct placement, you'll be striking the mole here, from below. Your choice of device may be striking the mole from a sideways action to the mole's thoracic cavity, but remember that the mole is fully armoured here, and although your intentions may be good, you could restrain the mole around the upper thoracic area, or worse, strike the face or the forelimb. Maybe you are using a device that will strike the mole here in the abdomen, the most unpleasant point to restrain a mole, as it will undoubtedly be left to struggle as the softer tissue and organs will offer high resistance. When we leave a device, we do so with the intention of inflicting some level of suffering on a target mole. We have an obligation to inspect that device for any suffering that may occur from our actions or changes to the location. It seems that for many the hardest part when in conflict with a mole is returning to check the devices. Devices are left down for days, possibly weeks, and the people that do it come armed with a bucket full of excuses like, I've got other things to do, or the professional excuse of, I got called to another job. If you place a device for a mole today, you know you have a personal obligation to check it tomorrow. If you know you cannot check it tomorrow, then don't place it today. It is that simple. And that old adage of the trap will kill the mole instantly anyway, it doesn't wash. We have no knowledge as to any tampering from a third party, both of 2 or 4 legs. We do not know what circumstances may have changed at the location, and if you do not return to inspect it, then you will not learn. Weather impact, soil movement, or simply the lawn being cut can all result in your device being packed with soil or being evicted from the ground by your target mole, or even containing a restrained live mole. The mole is our teacher. We always remain the pupil. If you do not turn up for lessons, then you will fall behind, and you'll have to rely on the prowess of those people on social media who preach their skills learned from the comfort of a chair. You cannot beat practice and experience to glean the knowledge to progress in the craft of competing with a mole. When we embark on any animal control, we have an obligation to treat that animal with welfare and respect. Sadly, the mole is often omitted from this list. There are no excuses for bad working practices, and obviously the old devices still used today would benefit from some sort of evaluation or approval. We can set a minimum standard in the United Kingdom by inspecting our devices just once a day. It's not unreasonable. I'm going to leave you with a few tips now, and I hope you've enjoyed this window into the world of the mole. So it's from me. Cheerio. You can take a mole trap from a box and immediately put it to work. There should be no reason with any trap to have to adjust, tweak or tune it, as it should operate as the design and construction intended. There is no requirement to boil them in rose water, bury them in soil or leave them in the light of a full moon. Such tales are told in the belief to remove the smell of manufacturer. But providing your device does not come into contact with an obnoxious odorous substance, then the mole will have no reason to shy away from the placement. I master produce live moles for film work, and I am therefore required under a duty of care to ensure that the welfare for that mole. That welfare requires providing food, worms, and these are readily taken from the hand as moles have no natural fear of us humans. Many claims are made to wear gloves to prevent any scent from your hands transferring to the traps, which would deter the mole. That can also be dispelled. The old molars with their porous clay and wood traps never wore gloves, so why would we now? The pleasure of their time would have been tobacco, either smoked or chewed, so they would have rubbed soil through the hands to mask any smell of its use. So there are few reasons to slip on a pair of gloves, unless your hands are cold. Gloves can be intrusive, if thick, and many of the products gloves are made from have an odour, especially plastic, rubber or latex. Question the assertion of transfer of odours. Of course it is important to consider the harmful bacteria in soil such as Clostridium or Listeria, but providing you do not pick your nose and bite your fingernails, personal hygiene and keeping your hands clean is a better option. When setting the half barrel device, some people have trouble with the strength in the springs, but a simple cup hook helps, either screwed to a post or your shed or on a block of wood. Place the block of wood on the ground and hold it down with the knee. Then hook the trap loop under the hook and pull up. This will allow more leverage and you can hold the spring whilst hooking the mumble pin and the retaining bar together. Setting the half barrel device is not difficult, and with practice you'll soon achieve it fast and efficiently. But what about releasing it? Releasing the device is pretty simple, but you have to be very careful, a little bit brave. Never just fire the mumble pin off to release the springs. It will damage the device and it can snap the spring where it meets the loop. I find the easiest way to do it is to put my fingers in the loop and brace with my thumb. My thumb is now acting as a brace against the trap body. This allows me to put my finger around the other side and release the mumble pin, releasing the spring. I can place my thumb on the top and slowly allow it to rise up. Turn it round and repeat the other end. Fingers in the loop, brace with the thumb, release with the mumble pin, spring comes loose, thumb on the top, slowly release the device. Safest and easiest way to release the device. In hard ground, the 8mm probe may struggle slightly, so wiggle it slightly as it goes down. It will help it penetrate through. In stony ground, the 8mm probe is better than the 10mm probe because it will actually pass through the substrate slightly easier. However, remember that in wet ground you may want to use a 10mm. Don't go any thicker than a 10mm. There's going to come a time when you have to work in adverse working conditions. Snow and frost, don't be put off. If it's really cold, the hands will start to feel it. Have some traps set in the bag, ready to go. It'll save time at the trap site. You'll thank me for that piece of advice. Catching moles in the snow is no different than catching them in the normal ground. Just because there's a covering of white stuff doesn't mean to say the ground's frozen underneath. You just have to scrape the snow to one side and then just trap as normal. The ground might not be frozen underneath. This will be evident in the fact that the molehills are coming up through the snow. Scrape it to one side, create a working area. When it comes to the covering, look underneath the molehills. They might be frozen on the top, but underneath there's a lot of fresh, soft soil. Plenty of soil for covering a trap. When trapping in the snow, there's one important thing to remember. When you mark your traps, mark them well. You won't be able to find them when you come back the next morning. If you're working in hay or silage fields, a common problem is the length of the grass at the time you're required to position your traps. You can probe to find the tunnels, but are confronted with thick, healthy grass. It can obstruct you in the correct positioning of the device. I'm not one for gadgets and gimmicks, but these hand shears can often be the solution to such a problem. Having probed to locate the tunnel, trim the grass down to a manageable length prior to opening up a shaft. It will enable you to work as normal. Clear the grass away before you dig down, which will save you having to clear out any that may fall in. Also, when the grass is thick, consider the use of the Japanese trowel, as the ground will also often be heavy and require a little extra leverage to remove.